Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best You interview series. It's Gary here again, and thank you as always for taking the time to tune in. And today I'm delighted to be joined by strategic advisor, best-selling author, and TV show host Purdeep Sangha, who is here to discuss his expansive career spanning empowering CEOs, executives, and entrepreneurs to achieve ultra performance and success. Purdeep's holistic approach integrates work and life, making him and his team ideal guides for individuals seeking excellence in both realms. I could use a lot of that, Purdeep, so I am very, very happy to have you on the show. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gary. I appreciate it.
I'm delighted. I'm delighted. So, you and I had a chance to catch up prior to recording, and I got a wee bit of your background. But for the listeners, can you tell me a bit more about your background and what got you to this point?
Yeah, sure. Really good question. So I think my background, wow, if we're going to start right at the beginning, I grew up in a small town in Canada. My parents were immigrants, immigrated over. They had my brother and I grew up on an orchard. So that's all, my parents knew how to work hard. They started working on an orchard, eventually bought their own orchard. And so as far as I can remember, I was out there running around in the trees, playing around with animals. And I would say it was a great upbringing from that perspective. A lot of hard work, getting up early in the morning, sometimes 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and going out and working all day. And sometimes it was super hot days. But it taught me a lot of work ethic. And then you can say fast forward, went into academics, was in business, but also neuroscience and performance psychology. So I've been studying performance and neuroscience for wow, almost 30 plus years now. So that was a big part of my life. And that really stemmed from I had a substitute teacher that came over from Europe at that time. And they were a little bit more advanced in terms of, let's just say maybe it was positive psychology or even performance at that time. And he drew a bunch of words up on the chalkboard, put circles around them, and then connected them with lines and said, "This is a mind map."
Right.
And I was fascinated from that moment. And I went up after the class. I said, "What is this?" And he said, "If you're interested, go to the library and look up famous inventors like Leonardo da Vinci and scientists like Einstein." So I did. And
Yeah.
it was really cool because I saw something that was very similar. A couple of things. A, they connected a whole bunch of dots and thoughts and ideas together in diagrams. And the other one was really their belief around a collective consciousness or universal genius, for example. They never really attributed their genius to themselves. They attributed it to something greater, where it was almost like they were tapping into it.
Yeah.
So that's when I started to study brain science, which is now known as neuroscience, you can say,
Yeah.
because I was always fascinated by human potential in the human brain. And then I learned how to do things like I had a photographic memory, speed reading, all these different techniques to try to optimize my brain. And I would do funny things. And just to, for example, I'd sit there with a TV like super low in terms of volume and try to, close my eyes and listen to the TV so I could work on my sense of hearing. So I do funny things like that as a kid. But fast forward, I took neuroscience and performance psychology courses academically, and then was in the business world. I was a corporate executive for 14 years. And then I wasn't excited about the corporate world anymore at that level. My goal was to be a CEO of a major company,
Right.
but I just really didn't align with it. And I always liked helping people. Like that's been a part of my soul for a very long time. I was a
Yeah.
personal trainer at 17. I was a tutor throughout high school and university. So, and in the corporate world, I was always a mentor or a coach. So then I left and started my own firm. And basically, what we did was we helped business leaders perform better, not only in their professional, you can say, area of life, but also the personal area.
Yeah.
So, because of my background, performance psychology, I did a lot of work over the years in areas such as relationship, parenting, family dynamics, social dynamics, all those kinds of things. So, was able to help people on the personal side because a lot of times they would say, "Hey, look, you know what? My life is falling apart, my marriage is falling apart, or I don't have time for my kids. Yet I'm trying to be a high performing CEO or
Mm.
business leader. How do I do that? I feel like something has to give."
Yeah.
So over the years, I'd literally, because I'm very systematic, we had built these data points in terms of, okay, if this happens, how can a person react? Or what are the strategies they can put in place to actually counter that and perform better? And in the business that I started, the advisory firm, we literally we partnered with 20 different universities and research institutions, mainly in US and Canada and some overseas, to answer this question. How can a business professional perform at their highest potential and live a high quality of life at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a bunch of studies. We had a bunch of PhDs working with us, and we came up with some really cool information. And we've been using that ever since to help business leaders and professionals perform better, not only in their professional life, but also their personal life. And we also have an element of health performance in there as well, because that was struggling for a lot of these individuals. So we brought on the health side, mainly because my wife's an expert in that area. She's an expert in functional medicine and health performance. So it started off originally, actually, what we did, we partnered with another organization. So they were ex-NBA, NHL, NFL trainers.
Right.
And so we would get them to work with some of our clients. But then we found that, holy crow, like not everybody wants to be an MBA level, you can say, performance. They just need everyday supplementation and stuff like that and sleep. And so that's where my wife came in. We actually brought that in-house. So essentially, we're a one-stop shop where someone says, hey, look, I need to improve my performance in all areas of my life or any area of my life. Can you help me? And our answer is yes. Because I have a passion for this, mainly, Gary, because I saw my parents struggle. My parents, my dad, both of them being immigrants, and how immigrants typically struggle and they sacrifice. But my dad didn't have that level of fulfillment. His outlet was really around alcohol. That he struggled with alcoholism.
Right.
And I think that's probably where I started to study psychology, because I was always trying to figure out, when was he going to drink? How much was he going to drink? Were there some tell signs in terms of, and I actually became pretty good at figuring out when my dad was going to drink.
Yeah.
I'd tell my mom, I think he's going to drink today. And she's like, no, he's not going to drink today. And then he'd drink. So I got to know his behaviors and his patterns, which really got me on that journey. So fast forward, here we are today, and we have a huge passion. We have a huge mission in terms of helping people be successful, but also live quality of life as well.
Yeah, I love that. The main word that was coming up for me, Purdeep, as you were explaining all that, was the literal patterns. You used the word just at the end there, and in terms of patterning, not to go too far away from the remaining questions that I was thinking of asking. Maybe we don't get to them anyway, but is everything, in your opinion, a pattern? Is everything a genuine dots connected by lines that can be pretty much predicted?
Yeah, really good question. I would say for the most part, yes. So are most people predictable in terms of their patterns? Yes. I'll give you an example. Research shows that roughly about 40 to 45% of our day is based on habits and patterns, like routine patterns and habits. So the answer is yes, most of us are. I think those patterns can change when people have self-awareness.
Right.
And so to answer your question, yes, most people react pretty much the same way. But the challenge is we can't always, we try to predict it, but it's not always the case. And I'll give you an example. Personality assessments. Right? The big money makers, there's tons of assessments out there. Are you going to be good at sales? Or are you going to be good at administrative work? Well, and from a psychology perspective, I would say the vast majority of psychologists believe that the consistency in terms of what they all agree upon is what they call the big five personality traits, right? Everything else, it's hard to say. Like, you can't really pigeonhole people that much because situations are different and people can change within certain situations. For example, am I always going to be an extrovert? I'm not an extrovert, by the way. I'm in between. But let's just say I was. Am I always going to be an extrovert in every single situation? Not always.
Yeah.
So can you predict with a high likelihood? Yes. But is it 100% accurate? No.
And when you get leaders coming to you, they've obviously attained a level of success to the point where it becomes unsuccessful for them in terms of how they're manifesting and managing their life going forward. Are they looking towards your services, the one-stop shop that you have, to say, I need to identify these, or I need to break these, or I don't even think, I think I'm more random. Because in my experience, a lot of people think that they're so completely unique and no one has ever faced this
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah,
No one has ever, faced these circumstances that I'm facing right now. And therefore, I don't know that there's an actual fix for this. And then I say, okay, sit down, tell me a bit more about it. And then you start to say, right, well, that's actually not true. And then you
yeah.
look into that. Is that a similar experience to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's that saying, it's not my saying, but I heard it and it really hit home. What is personal is general. So what we think is personal to us is typically pretty general because there's a lot of other people experiencing it. So it's funny, whenever I do a talk or I do a webinar or even a podcast sometimes, I will get feedback saying, "Hey, were you talking about me?
Really?
Were you talking about me?" And some of my clients will say that. I'm like, "No, there's 10 of you that I don't mean to say you're not special,
Yeah.
but it's not you."
Yes.
So many people feel that they're being talked to. And I think that's the beauty of this. That's the reason why people listen to podcasts. That's why people listen or go on YouTube because they believe that they are in that story, right?
Yeah.
And it's meant for them. So the other side is, do people know? Are they fully aware? I would say at a cognitive level, some people are, and
Yeah.
some people are not. It really depends. Clarity is the first place where we start.
Yeah.
110%. We are very goal focused and goal oriented. So everything about the work that we do, what we figure out first is what are your goals? And if you don't know your goals, because most people don't have identified effective goals, is we help them set those goals.
Yeah.
And so from the goals, then we can identify what's working and what's not, and the best path to actually achieve those goals. Because a lot of people don't have clarity. And even the clarity that they do have, it's not necessarily the clarity that they should have.
Hmm.
So a lot of people are aiming for a certain thing, but it's not going to make them happy. And that's ultimately, that's not the end goal.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned goals there. I was actually just corresponding with someone this morning before we started recording about that very thing. It was kind of like, what themes are you seeing with in general terms, with feedback from your podcast, with work with your clients, with the educational work that you do? And I said a lot of times it could be just because of the time of year, or it could just be the weather, or it could be any plethora of things. But goal setting, which is something that I've taken for granted because I've been in project management for so long, that that's what you do. You just set the goals for the project and then you manifest that into the tasks and the overall scope and schedule and such like that. But it's a very often, I guess, misunderstood and definitely underperformed task where I think what I've experienced, certainly of late, has been people with, and I think you kind of alluded to it there, a bit of a vague idea of, this is where I'm going. This is why I'm
Hmm.
doing this.
Hmm.
This is I've got the clarity. You don't need to teach me that, like that kind of thing. And you're going, well, explain it back to me then, and then I'll regurgitate what you said to me, and then we'll see if we actually understand each other. And when you have that conversation, which doesn't take a long time, you then have that situation where you kind of blink at each other and say, what do you want to do from here? Here's how
Yeah.
I can help, and moving forward. So you're definitely onto something there in terms of, the basics not being very well understood in terms of objective setting.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't fully understand or grasp the magnitude and the impact that goals have.
Yeah.
So that people talk about that study, that typical study that was done where they did a longitudinal study of people that wrote down goals and in terms of their grad year, and then they followed them decades later and they realized, holy crow, these individuals are more successful, not only from a career and financial perspective,
Yeah.
but from an overall health and relationship perspective, those people
Yeah.
that wrote down goals. Now, there's a reason for that. Our brain is fundamentally a goal driven organ.
Yeah.
That's it. And this is what neuroscience shows. So
Yeah.
if we present our brain with a goal, it is most likely, here's how it works, is we essentially take in all this information from the world around us. And what it does is it has the job to filter out what's applicable and what's not according to our goals.
Yeah.
So if we have very clear goals, then it brings in and it enables that information to be able to be processed by our brain so we can say, aha, okay, now I can do this, or I see this, and I can make more effective decisions based on the
Yeah.
goals that we have. If we don't have goals, our mind is not as effective and efficient. I'll use a personal example. And I did some of these studies I participated in myself
Right.
because I like to experiment on myself. And I've been doing this for decades where, and mind you, I'm biased because, I'm the person that is actually, sometimes designing these studies and whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But I'm biased. And for example, this one period of time, I didn't do any goals for 6 months.
Right.
So no goals for 6 months, no tracking, none of that, right? And so what I realized after, if I did a rough estimate in terms of my productivity, I was 63% less productive,
Wow.
which was a significant amount.
Yeah.
And so what I realized was, wow, sometimes I just sit there aimlessly and be like, oh, I'll do this or I'll do that and I'll do this, and I was jumping around to different places, and sometimes and I'm in this area. This is the work that I do. And even if I don't put goals in,
Yeah.
struggle. So that was a real eye opener for me as well,
Yeah.
because practically it has a huge implication. So clarity is very, very important. It just makes things more effective. But here's the other thing too. It's what we call resource optimization. When we have clarity, we can use our resources more effectively and efficiently,
Yes.
because we all have limited resources,
Yeah.
our time, our energy, our focus. And so the more clarity we have on the goals, the more efficiently and effectively we can use our resources and time.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Just on the weekend there, my son Leo, he was walking around with a little pad, just about the size of the palm of your hand. And I got him that actually probably a couple of years ago to write down his goals for snowboarding for that particular season. Just how he wanted to do his diet and his sleep and his training and his strength work and such like that. That lasted for 5 minutes at the time, but he still kept a hold of the little booklet. So just on the weekend, he was kind of walking around, and in a sense, kind of trying to say, "Look what I'm doing," And I says, "What's that you're doing there?" And he says, "What I've found is that if I write down he didn't use the word objectives, but if I write down what I'm going to do this week, I have a better chance of actually doing it. And I like the structure. I like to understand when I'm working out. I like to
Yeah,
understand when I'm studying. He's now working with me, so I like to understand when I'm going to dedicate the hours to doing what you're doing." And I can't help but beam at that. He's 15, and I'm
awesome.
saying, "Is that working for you?" He says, "It really works for me." I says, "Can you spread the word about that to everyone you know? Because everyone should be doing that. You're already setting yourself apart." He's got a wee competitive edge. So you're already setting yourself apart from other people right now by setting an intention. It's okay if it changes, but then you have something fundamentally to look back and say, right, well, this was what I thought my North Star for this week was. Circumstances changed. What does that mean? Back to your resources. What resources do I need for this new reality that's been created or I've created for myself? And this is all the stuff. So then I get excited and I start to talk to him kind of like this. And then he's like, "Whoa, whoa, Dad, that's a bit too much. I just like to write some things down." But just to start that practice so early, Pradeep, is
Oh,
fascinating. And I didn't teach him that, but he's not directly, but he's looking at the whiteboard that we have. He's looking at the way that I track and manage things. He's looking at the way that I check up on him to see how he's doing, if he needs any help or support, or what progress he's making, and things like that. So I wonder if there's people who just have a natural propensity to doing it, and who have seen and felt the benefits of it, and people who are saying, "I'm fine as I am. Everything's going okay." I don't
yeah.
know. Do you see that?
Well, I think there's a few things there. So if we take a look at natural, like our personality is developed by our nature,
Mm,
right? And nurture. So nature is our genetics, for
yeah,
example, or expression of our genetics. And then there's the nature aspect, how we're raised. So obviously you raised him in a way that he's more tuned or in tune to be able to pick up on those things.
yeah,
From a genetic perspective, one of the aspects of personality, for example, is conscientiousness,
right,
which is a trait that, let's just say, people who are conscientious typically tend to be on time. They tend to be organizers, right? They are those ones that say, "Oh, I don't want to disappoint somebody else," right?
yeah,
So that is that trait. So he probably is higher or at a certain level where he picks up on those things.
yeah,
So that's important as well. So that could be part of his personality. Plus, you're nurturing him, and then there's this concept that came out probably about a decade ago based on research called the growth mindset,
mm,
right,
yes,
by a researcher, Dweck. And she basically said, um, individuals who are open to learning, who believe that they can change and grow, are more likely to perform better than those who believe that they don't have that opportunity to grow. So there's a big element of self-reflection and self-awareness in there as well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that I used to think that a lot of people were self-aware, and I can tell you that not a lot of people are self-aware.
Yeah.
I actually think that it's going down. There's, I could go into a rabbit hole because over the last 3 years, I've actually been doing more studies in maladaptive behaviors.
Right.
And I think, especially in the younger ages where it's all about social media, it's all about me, me, me.
Yeah.
I think that ability to self reflect is challenged.
Yeah.
And so we might have a bigger issue here as the generations get older, but self reflection is so important and the desire to be able to grow and change. So it sounds like your son already has that.
Yeah, I think he does actually, and it's such a good conversation to be having because he had a makeup test that he was sick a couple of weeks ago. The teacher says you have to have this makeup test, and in terms of self reflection and using it positively, not as an opportunity to beat your previous self up or give yourself a negative experience today. He wrote the test. I said, "How did it go?" He says, "It was a bit more difficult than I thought." And I says, "Why do you think that is?" Open ended question. Leave it up to him to decipher what that looks like. And he says, "I didn't prepare enough. I thought that I was prepared, and then upon reflection, I didn't realise." And back in the day, not so long ago, he would have used that as an opportunity to deflect, to blame something
Yeah.
else, to say, "Well, they never told me that was going to be in there, and none of my pals who'd already taken the test had given me a heads up." Or it would have been, one of those blame someone else. But he said, "I didn't concentrate my efforts on the right times." And I said, "You've been on your phone quite a wee bit this last wee while." And he's like, "Yep, I have." So, and then I leave it at that. I don't overdo it. He takes it, absorbs it, and just that maturity curve of saying, "I'm going to use this self reflection for good rather
Mhm.
than for any form of negativity," because there's literally 0 point of that. Certainly not in the Gillen household. You can take the lesson, you can kind of feel how you feel, and then use it and move on. And
Yep.
and don't dwell. Use what you need to use from that. So it's fascinating to see that evolving from him at such a young age.
Yeah, you should be proud as a father because that is huge. And I
Yeah,
think that's one
yeah,
of the biggest things that I see in children these days because it's basically what we call when someone blames something that is not in their control,
yeah,
that is not a great sign.
yeah,
But when someone blames something or takes accountability for something that is in their control, that's true self-reflection. And that's extremely powerful. And so that for your son is awesome because that just says how he can grow up and actually use that for his advantage. Because those individuals that continuously blame other things that they have no control over, right?
yeah,
It is a specific mechanism that people use to avoid accountability
yeah.
and self-reflection. There's an ego element to this as well, depending on the severity. But that's not a good sign. So your son is. It sounds like he's well on his way to being able to grow and expand as a human being.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. I am very, very proud of him, of course, and that's why I mention him often on the podcast. But just literally today in this conversation, from the spirit of studying the growth and studying the patterns and studying the behaviors, it's interesting. It's fascinating.
Fascinating.
I could spend tons and tons of time on that. So in terms of back to the work that you specifically do, obviously you've mentioned the neuroscience, you've mentioned the psychology, and a little bit of the spirituality and mindfulness. How do these disciplines, you know, kind of influence your interaction with these leaders? Do they know what they're getting when they come to you, or are they kind of like, "I don't want none of that mumbo jumbo. I just want you to help me set some goals"? What does that spectrum look like?
Yeah, really interesting. So there's that old marketing saying you sell them what they want, you give them what they need.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and so I think for me, one of the biggest things is when I started this work, vast majority of people, I would say, would come and say, help me with my professional performance.
right.
And very early on in the stages, once we do some discovery, we realize that it's not the professional performance that will lead to the biggest results. It's the personal side.
Yeah,
And so that, it's not always a blunt conversation. It takes a little bit of prying sometimes, and then it opens up. And then even deeper, if we get into a level where people are talking about how they actually feel about life in general, whether they feel like they're being fulfilled or whether they feel like they're missing out on something,
Yeah.
it does come into the conversation. I do a lot of training. I do a lot of workshops. And
Right.
in the workshops, I touch on what we call life energy. And from that life energy, and this I'll tell people, some people refer to this as spiritual energy.
Okay.
And the way I approach it is from an energetic perspective, an energy perspective, not necessarily anything religious or higher or above or whatever that looks like. I explain it from a scientific perspective because that's where we're at right now. Science is starting to, or has over the last decade, started to intersect with what was traditionally spiritual. For example, meditation and mindfulness,
Yeah.
which has been shown now. It is one of the top practices, if not the top practice, that is being recommended and used by high expectation, high stakes, high risk roles, like military, for example, in the US.
Right.
So, and sports, mindfulness is huge in sports right now in terms of helping people deal with anxiety and performance.
Mm.
So, people 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it became a little bit of a trend from the 60s and 70s. But if you talked about this meditation in the 50s or whatever, you'd probably be like, people look at you like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But now it's become in even the corporate world now.
Yeah.
People have been talking about it and bringing it into practice. Excuse me, there, my mouth is getting a little bit dry. But it's becoming more mainstream, and science is showing that it actually changes the structure of your brain.
Yeah.
Right? It changes the neuroanatomy of your brain, which is very, very powerful. How do I? And I'm so passionate about this, Gary, because my grandfather taught me spiritual practices such as mindfulness and meditation because my great grandfather was a spiritual teacher in India for 65 years.
Right.
So I grew up with this. So when I mentioned the science aspect, it wasn't just a science, it was a science and the mindfulness and meditation and the spiritual practices that I put into place as a young boy that enabled me to do the things that I did.
Yeah.
And I was starting to study how does this work a long time ago. So that's where I by explaining it from a scientific perspective to people, they are more apt and open to taking a look at, oh, maybe I should take a look at this. So, for example, mindfulness, yes, there's a spiritual element to it, but there's a scientific element, which is it'll help you with your focus and anxiety.
Yeah.
It'll help you actually perform better. So people are like, yeah, I have a tough time focusing. I have a tough time being present, which then stops me from being as effective. Bingo. There we go. We've got an open space.
Yeah.
I don't talk about it from a spiritual perspective. I talk about it from here. Let's use a scientific backed practice to be able to help you. Then from there, when we get to a certain level of people talking about are they fulfilled or not fulfilled, we do take a look at the spiritual aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have, this is my personal belief, we have a spiritual self and a spiritual signal. And if we're not aligned with that, we're going to have a tough time in life. There's another saying, again, not my saying, that said, anything done without the soul is short lived.
Right.
And for me, that hits home because it's so true.
Yeah.
If my soul isn't engaged with it, it is short lived. It's a fad. I don't have enough passion or drive from persistence and commitment. So I fully believe that. And I think people, for the vast majority of people, if you take a look at the stats, roughly 85 to 95% of people believe in something greater,
Yeah.
whether it's God or spiritual being or something greater than how we're living today. So most people are open to it.
Yeah. It's incredible, the benefits and just even talking about the evolution there of from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to oh, you're a hippie, you're into this new age stuff, whatever the conversation
Yeah.
would be at the time, to today. If you had a conversation with someone, especially someone who is genuinely interested in self-development, self-education, self-progression, to say, what are your mindful practices? If they said, oh, I don't have any, that would be like a pause in the conversation to say, explain that a little bit more if you don't mind. And I think it's one of these things where it means different things to different people. And I
Yes.
think what happens is, in terms of certainly in the conversations I'm having or I've had to date, it's a case of saying, it's up to you. I mean, journaling is another example where I say, have you ever attempted journaling? And they say, I wouldn't even know where to start. It's okay, have you heard of a pen? Yep. Have you heard of a piece of paper? Yep. Have you heard of words? Yep. Can you write words? Yes. That's journaling. Like, you write it down. It means whatever it means to you. You can use it for whatever it is to get you going, to see what it looks like, to see what it feels like. And if it works for you, it works for you. Yes, you can get, guidance, advice, topics
Hmm.
to kind of prompt you in terms of what it is you're going to do. But the literal art, and it's kind of back to the objective setting as well, the literal art of writing something down and then looking at your words and then trying to figure out your intent and your spirit behind your words and then what you're going to do with that information going forward. It's the exact same for mindfulness. I wouldn't even know where to start. Okay, do you know how to sit at peace? Do you know how to close your eyes? Do you know how to breathe? You could try that. Why don't you make a start on that? And there's so many apps and electronic things out there now that can help you do that too. So it's one of these things. What I seem to find is there's a lack of understanding of the practice and the art in and of itself, a lack of understanding of the benefits of that, and a genuine lack of, what could I say, investment in it, because it's not a quick fix. I'm going to
Yep.
do some
Yep.
mindful practices today and I'm going to have a great sleep tonight and I'm going to feel fully energetic tomorrow and everyone's going to see a marked difference tomorrow morning when I go into the office. No, no, it's an investment in you first and foremost. And then, the manifestation of the benefits that come out through your own life and then hopefully that impact positively other people's lives would be
Mm.
noticeable over time. Those are the key facets. Do you see in your practice a genuine impatience with the amount of time things would take to get to the results that they desire?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because everybody, and I blame this on Amazon because Amazon made it, overnight delivery.
Yeah.
They really messed with not only the business world, but people in general. They have expectations. Like my kids believe that if they want something, they can get it right away.
Yeah.
And that's not the way it happens when it comes to behavioral change.
Yeah.
It requires time. It requires a lot of foresight. There is every single day I am having aha moments in my own life,
Yeah.
in my own mindset, my own emotional capacity. That I'm like, oh, okay, I'm learning something new. I think people are just way too impatient.
Yeah.
I think we've become a society based on, especially in the Western world, but it's impacting the Eastern world as well. I think those who are, how do I say, well versed in this area understand because there is, I think there's a population, for example, where we've been trained to say, hey, everything happens in a short period of time, let's get it done. And then there's wisdom, those people that have gone through the challenges, the adversities that then get to a point where they slow down
Yeah.
and they realize that not everything happens overnight and
Yeah.
they prioritize things effectively, and that's essentially what it comes down to. I'll give a personal example myself. I am doing a number of different things. I'm raising two kids. I have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old. One of my sons, for example, is having some behavioral challenges that I have to spend a lot more time trying to correct.
Right.
And it's important for me to do so. And my daughter has some. And the important thing here is I'm not trying to have perfect children. We can't have perfect children. But when we identify maladaptive behaviors that are like, oh, this could really not work out well for them,
Yeah.
then it's our responsibility as parents to jump in,
Yeah.
right? That's what we're meant to do. So that is one side. Then I have multiple businesses that I'm running. I'm also always doing university, like doctoral level courses, for example.
Mm.
And my wife and I are learning to dance, and I'm trying to learn how to play the guitar. And
Yeah.
I'm telling you, I'm doing all these kinds of things, but there's a priority.
Yeah.
There's a priority. Am I getting into playing guitar as much as I want to and making the advancement and the growth and playing all the songs that I want? No,
Yeah.
I'm not. I wish I could,
Yeah.
but I know that I have to set the priority. I
Yeah.
know that I can't spend 3 hours a day practicing guitar. I can't even spend 1 hour.
Mm.
I'm spending 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I have to be okay with not making the same level of progression that I would in some other areas.
Yeah.
So for many people, that's one of the things I have to get them to understand is what is priority?
Yeah.
Like where do you want to make the biggest traction?
Yeah.
Where do you want to get ahead? And then let's take a look at a realistic timeline. And I think once people see that, they're like, okay. And there's a sense of relief as well.
Yes.
Because if people believe that they need to get it done in a certain time frame, it creates more anxiety than positive, you can say, stress to be able to actually get the energy to do something.
Yeah, because they got an opportunity to manage their own expectations at the same time as probably within their own network as well, to say, I'm working on it. You know, you'll see some discernible changes. There might be some practical, tactical things that happen fairly early, but in terms of the genuine, meaningful growth and change that they're investing in, it's not going to come right away. And I think
No.
that probably comes with that relief of kind of saying, right, okay, I was wondering. I've had many conversations with either clients or potential clients where they say, how quickly can we fix this? And I'm saying, well, how long did it take you to get here? You know, and it's the
Yeah.
age old kind of coach to client conversation, but there's a little bit of genuine, you know, information within the conversation, within the comedy. Quite frankly, you know, it took you 45 years to get to this spot. You know, we're not going to cure this in inverted commas, of course, in a 45-minute session. You know, we're
Yeah.
going to start to peel things back. We're going to start to have an understanding of why it's important, what it is, whether that's actually the thing that we should be concentrating our time and efforts on. You know, but that investment of time, I often feel is it's actually probably a great example to talk about Amazon. It's the expectations of this could and should be an easy fix, because if my blender breaks down today, I can have one either this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning, you know,
Yeah.
without leaving my home. So I must be able to do the same within my own being to be able to move forward. You know, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating stuff. So in terms of, you mentioned there about all the things that you're doing, and obviously there's a hierarchy and a priority to those in general, and probably more specific on a given day where you're kind of like, I could maybe carve out an extra 10 minutes for guitar this time, or there's a zero guitar for the next 2 days, or whatever that looks like. But in general terms, you know, what's one regular practice that you employ for yourself to become a better version of you than when you were yesterday?
Sure. There's a number. So one is meditation.
Yeah,
So for sure, 100%, because that regulates me,
yeah,
and I feel so much better. Bottom line, when I do that. So that's the one practice I do every single day consistently. The second practice is I always go for walks. So walks are something else. It gets me up, moving around, gets me outside.
yeah,
That's the second practice. The third practice is goal setting. So I always set goals every single day in terms of what my objectives are for the day.
yeah,
And then the fourth one is I always spend time with my kids
yeah.
in some capacity, whether it's first thing in the morning, 5, 10 minutes, just hugging them. And, you know, my kids are still young. They're 11 and 9. So I can crawl into bed with them and I just, you know, rub their back a little bit before they head off to school. But those are very, very important to me. So those are the basic practices that I do on a regular basis.
And if you didn't do those, would you feel it kind of almost immediately if one of those major things was missing from your day?
Yeah, yeah. And sorry, I have one more, an exercise. So
Yeah,
I exercise is a non-negotiable for me as well. So when I don't do those, yes, I feel like I'm not myself.
yeah,
And I think this is really important. And if you don't mind me sharing this, it's something I learned from my grandfather. So my grandfather, I said, was a very spiritual person because his dad was a spiritual teacher.
mhm,
But my grandfather was also in the military for 30 plus years in India.
right,
3 stars. He was the most disciplined man I knew. And in fact, he's the one that taught me about principles and values.
yeah,
And Gary, I look back, and I don't know if you feel the same way. I look back, and I openly say they don't make men like they used to. You know, people with principles, discipline, self integrity, your word is your bond, strong values. And it's different today. But my
mm,
grandfather was that person that I look back and say, wow, that's a person that I can look up to with respect because he's got a ton of wisdom.
yeah,
And so he taught me something about discipline,
yeah,
not only from the military, but if you take a look at, for example, in the Eastern world,
mm,
yoga was a discipline. It still is a discipline. It's not designed as a recreation.
mhm,
It's a discipline. In fact, the term yoga stems from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means to bind with or yoke with.
right,
And here's the premise behind this is when you do a practice to such a degree that you become one with it, you bind with it,
yeah,
you yoke with it, you are no longer having to be disciplined. You
yeah,
are one with it and you have true freedom.
yeah,
So by being disciplined, you can create your own freedom. For example, in a real practical world, for for many people, if you eat healthy, if you discipline in eating healthy, and you have discipline and exercise, you are far less likely to get heart disease.
Mhm.
Far less likely. So you get older in your years and you can still eat the things that you want to eat
Yeah.
and you get to exercise on your terms. However, let's just say you haven't done that. You haven't had the discipline. At some point in time, there's a high likelihood that the doctor could say, hey, look, you are borderline having on heart disease or you've suffered a minor heart attack. This happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Now you can't eat this and you have to exercise here. But guess what? You can't exercise to that high intensity. You're restricted to these types of activities. So now what happens? That person is restricted even more
Yeah.
in their ability and they lose that freedom.
Mhm.
So this is the beauty of being disciplined and having the freedom because you talked about it. And this is why I brought this up is because when you become one with it, when you don't do it, you feel like you're missing out. You feel like you're not yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the stem of the word yoga as a discipline.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And just reflecting on my own, back in the day, before I started to really take myself and my body and my person seriously, I've always taken myself seriously, but before I got really, really mindful about it, if I would sometimes dread the activity, whatever it was, where I'm kind of like, oh, I suppose I should do that before the end of the day, that kind of thing. And with my practices, it's not that now. It's I get to do that. I'm actually looking forward to that. I have a mental note that I'm going to write this down in my journal today, or I'm going to try that breathing technique that I learned about yesterday, or that I'd kind of forgotten about and got reminded about. And it's all that I can get to, rather than I really should do that so that I can check that box and get that badge from the app, or however it's measured in certain terms today. And I love that sentiment of like it just being part of who you are and what you are. I had a conversation with a student recently who was basically saying, I'm just about to graduate. I don't know if I'm going to go traveling or just go straight into the workforce. And I said, well, let's talk about that. Why don't we put down a list of advantages and disadvantages, or benefits and consequences, whatever, however you want to qualify the list. But this is what you'll get from taking this path, and this is what you won't get, and or this is what the outputs and outcomes would be. So we did a wee bit of that just from a very high level. But this is a young, early mid-20s guy, and one of the things I said to him there, Purdeep, which is exactly what you were saying there, was I said, if whatever you choose is going to be the right choice for you at that time. And one thing I need to tell you right now is please, please, please look after yourself, because it's very, very difficult. You're living in this vessel that's going to carry you for the next 70 years or so, hopefully. And if you can probably make a good attempt at fixing it in your 40s and 50s and 60s, it's going to be very, very difficult. That speaks to the restrictions you were just chatting about there. And why don't you do things on your own term? Build it into your life, build it into your practice. You'll just be a better human being because of that. And he was kind of getting it, he was kind of like, that's an odd thing to say. I was asking whether I should go traveling or whether I should go into the workplace, but it was an in and an opportunity to say, even if it just sits at the back of his brain for a wee while, and then that one day where he's like, I'm just going to go to the fast food restaurant because that's a bit easier, and then I'll definitely work out tomorrow. Today's just been a bit of a bummer of a day. Actually, I remember Gary saying, and what if I go there, and what if Gary's in the queue? And then Gary sees me, and then Gary, and I wouldn't mind that, not to be a tormentor of the students, but just in a positive sense to say you're at choice. Most people are at choice way more than they think they are, and you have the opportunity to make a good choice for yourself and for your future. But all too often the blinkers are on, and we're just making a choice for that immediate moment, and not really thinking bigger in wider terms.
Yeah, I love what you did there because I can just see that person a year later just thinking, Gary,
Yeah,
he's gonna have a mini Gary on his shoulder.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm just a wee guy, so I'm not that heavy, so it doesn't, it shouldn't be too much of a burden. Before I let you go, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. Before I let you go, where can people find out more about you, Purdeep?
So the best place you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Purdeep Sangha. My website's also purdeepsangha.com, and we have a newsletter that goes out, which is purdeep.substack.com.
Okay.
So I have a new newsletter where I talk about the science of winning. So those are the main places.
Perfect. We'll get those details on the show notes for this podcast, and I look forward to seeing the feedback. Thank you very, very much again, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. This has been awesome. I appreciate chatting with you.
Hello again. Thanks again for tuning in to this episode, and I do hope that you found it valuable and gained some insights. I do have an ask for you. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would absolutely love it if you would connect with me on my socials, and that's at LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search for my name and do whatever it is you need to do there to follow me and stay updated with all the latest content, tips, and discussions. And for any more resources that you're looking for, feel free to visit my website, garygillen.com. And while you're there, you can book a free, no obligation 30-minute coaching call directly with me through the site. Whether you're looking to enhance your performance or tackle a new challenge, I'm absolutely here to help you succeed, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. Thanks very much again, and until next time, keep pushing towards your goals and getting better each and every day, my friend.